Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Today we examine a photograph that challenges our understanding of the post-Civil War era in America. The image, dated 1870, shows a gathering of freed former slaves. At first glance, the photograph appears to capture a moment of newfound liberation. Men, women, and children standing together, their expressions seemingly content as they face the camera. The photograph was discovered in the archives of a small historical society in Georgia, tucked away in a collection of documents from a plantation that had transitioned to paid labor after the war. The curator who found it initially celebrated it as a rare positive image from an otherwise troubled time, a visual record of progress. The subjects stand in a semicircle on what appears to be the grounds of the former plantation. Their clothing is simple but dignified, certainly their Sunday best. Some of the men wear hats, held respectfully at their sides. The women's dresses, though plain, are pressed and proper. Several children stand in front, their faces aimed upward toward the photographer. What makes this image particularly interesting is that most photographs of former slaves from this period typically show solemn, serious expressions, the weight of generations of bondage and the uncertainty of freedom evident in their faces. But here, at first examination, many appear to be smiling. It was this unusual quality that prompted a digital archivist to enhance the image, using modern technology to bring clarity to the faded sepia tones. The enhancement process involves carefully adjusting contrast, sharpening details, and removing the damage of time. But as the details emerged with greater clarity, so did a disturbing truth. What had appeared as shadows or imperfections in the original photograph now revealed themselves as something far more sinister. Across the necks, wrists, and exposed forearms of nearly every adult in the image were visible scars, recent ones. Some appeared to be from whips, others from restraints, and some bore the unmistakable pattern of brands. The smiles that had initially seemed to convey happiness were revealed to be forced, strained expressions. In the enhanced image, one could clearly see the tension around their eyes, the unnatural pull at the corners of their mouths. These were not the faces of people celebrating freedom, but of those being coerced to present an image of contentment. Most disturbing was a figure partially visible at the edge of the frame, a white man whose arm extends just into view, holding what appears to be a riding crop. The implication is clear. This was not a documentation of successful emancipation, but propaganda, a staged photograph designed to suggest that former slaves were thriving under new arrangements that, in reality, may have differed little from their previous bondage. Who commissioned this photograph, and for what purpose? What happened to these individuals whose bodies still bore the fresh evidence of brutality, even as they were forced to perform happiness? And how many other such images exist, their true stories hidden beneath the fading veneer of historical deception? The photograph raises haunting questions about the reality of freedom in the aftermath of slavery, and the ways in which images themselves can be weapons of historical fiction. Our research into this disturbing photograph led us to the personal papers of Jeremiah Whitcomb, a Northern photographer who traveled through the South in the years following the war. His journal entries from March 1870 provide crucial context for what we now call the smiling bondsman image. Whitcomb had been commissioned by several Northern philanthropic societies to document the successful transition of the formerly enslaved into free laborers. These organizations were raising funds for educational initiatives in the South and needed visual evidence that their efforts were worthwhile. What Whitcomb's journal reveals, however, is his growing unease with the assignment. In an entry dated 2 days before the photograph was taken, he writes, "The plantation owner, Mr. Hargrove, insists I may only photograph his workers if they appear content. He speaks of them as his people still, though they are supposedly free. I have observed conditions here that contradict every assurance I received in Boston." Whitcomb documented how these free laborers lived in the same slave cabins, worked the same fields, and were subject to a contract system that kept them perpetually indebted to their former master. Most troublingly, he observed that corporal punishment continued despite being illegal under Reconstruction laws. The enhancement of the photograph reveals other details previously invisible to the naked eye. In the background stands the plantation house, and on its porch, barely discernible, are three figures watching the proceedings. Comparing these silhouettes with other historical records confirms one is likely Hargrove himself, alongside what appears to be two Union soldiers or officials. This places the image within the complex dynamics of early Reconstruction, when federal oversight was meant to ensure the implementation of emancipation, but often failed to penetrate the daily realities of plantation life. The presence of these officials, yet the clear evidence of continued abuse, tells its own story about the limits of federal power and willingness to enforce true freedom. Perhaps most heartbreaking is what our enhancement revealed about the children in the photograph. Initially appearing to be simply posed in front, closer examination shows several bearing fresh bruises on their exposed arms and legs. One child, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years, stands with her hand awkwardly positioned. Digital enhancement reveals her fingers appear broken and untreated. We managed to trace one subject from the photograph through census and church records. William Jackson, identifiable by a distinctive scar across his cheek, appears in Methodist church records 4 years after this photograph. The pastor's notes describe him as having finally escaped to Tennessee, bringing tales of continued servitude disguised as contract labor and punishment for any who dared speak of it to visiting Northerners. The story of this photograph parallels the larger narrative of Reconstruction, a period often sanitized in historical memory. The smiling faces that concealed suffering became metaphor for the optimistic legislation that masked continued oppression. What we see in The Smiling Bondsman is not merely individual tragedy, but evidence of a systemic failure, the gap between legal freedom and lived reality, captured in a single haunting image that was intended to obscure the very truth it now, through modern technology, reveals. The digital archaeology of this image opened unexpected doors. In pursuing the photograph's provenance, we discovered auction records indicating the image had changed hands multiple times before reaching the Georgia Historical Society. These transactions led us to the family archives of Senator Thaddeus Morrison, a vocal opponent of the more progressive Reconstruction policies. Morrison, we learned, had used this very image in 1873 during congressional debates, presenting it as evidence that federal intervention in Southern affairs was unnecessary. "See how they prosper under their natural employers," he reportedly stated, passing the photograph among his colleagues as proof that former slaves were content with their new arrangements. A series of letters between Morrison and plantation owner Hargrove reveals a calculated propaganda campaign. "Ensure they appear suitable for Northern sensibilities," wrote Morrison. "Any visible marks of discipline must be concealed." Hargrove's response was telling. "Some fresh wounds cannot be hidden, but we shall position them carefully and ensure compliance in their expressions." Through painstaking cross-referencing with local medical records kept by a Freedmen's Bureau doctor, we identified several individuals in the photograph. One woman, Martha Colson, had sought treatment 3 days before the photograph was taken. The doctor's notes describe lacerations consistent with whipping across the back and shoulders, but also mention her reluctance to explain how she received them, only stating they came from a disagreement about leaving. The most revealing discovery came from a faded diary belonging to Esther James, one of the children in the photograph. Written years later, when she had learned to read and write, she recalled this day with chilling clarity. "They washed us and dressed us fine like Sunday, but it weren't Sunday. Master Hargrove said Yankees were coming to take pictures and we must look happy with our situation or there would be consequences. Thomas didn't smile right, and after they left, they took him to the shed. We didn't see him for 2 days. Our investigation uncovered evidence that this photograph was not an anomaly. At least 6 similar images were commissioned across different southern states, all following the same pattern, carefully staged scenes of contentment that northern audiences would find reassuring. These images circulated in philanthropic circles and political forums, helping to shape a narrative that Reconstruction had accomplished its goals and further intervention was unnecessary. The technical enhancement that revealed the scars also brought forward a shadowy figure in the background we initially overlooked. Behind the main group, partially obscured by a tree, stands a black man in clothing different from the others, not plantation garb, but the uniform of the Freedmen's Bureau. His expression, unlike the others, shows no attempt at a smile, but rather a documented witnessing. Research identified him as Joseph Freeman, an agent assigned to monitor conditions but given limited authority to intervene. Freeman's later reports, buried in government archives, mentioned this photographic session specifically. The charade enacted for northern cameras makes mockery of liberty. I count 14 workers bearing fresh marks of the lash, forced to smile as though they were indeed free. His complaints went unheeded as federal commitment to reconstruction began its long, fatal decline. This photograph, intended as a tool of deception, now serves as evidence of the very conditions it was meant to obscure, a visual testament to freedom betrayed and justice deferred in what historians now recognize as America's unfinished revolution. The photograph's journey took an unexpected turn when our investigation caught the attention of Eliza Hargrove Winters, great-granddaughter of the plantation owner. Initially defensive, she eventually granted us access to a sealed family archive in her Charleston home's basement, a decision she attributed to making peace with history. Among yellowed ledgers and correspondence, we discovered something extraordinary. A second photograph taken mere minutes after the first. While the posed group remained in the same positions, this image captured an unguarded moment. The photographer had apparently exposed another plate immediately after the official portrait, perhaps intentionally. In this second image, the facade had crumbled. No forced smiles remained. Instead, we saw expressions of open defiance, sorrow, and in some faces, unmistakable rage. Several subjects had shifted their posture to deliberately reveal their scars, directly facing the camera. The white overseer visible at the frame's edge appeared to be moving toward them, caught in mid-stride, clearly alarmed at this unexpected act of rebellion. Whitcomb never submitted this second photograph to his northern patrons. His journal, previously fragmented, contained a missing page we located within the Hargrove papers. On it, he wrote, "I cannot in good conscience present only the falsehood, yet the truth would ensure no northern eyes ever look this way again. I have taken 2 images. One for my patrons, one for history. May future eyes see what I have seen." Technical analysis confirmed both photographs' authenticity. The latent image had been properly fixed but never printed until now, existing only as a glass negative for over a century, protected from light in its sealed box. Most revealing was a small notation on the negative's paper wrapper in Whitcomb's handwriting. "The genuine freedom, 15 seconds later." Census records revealed another layer to this story. Within 6 months of these photographs, 23 people from Hargrove Plantation vanished from local records. We traced several to emerging black communities in Kansas and Oklahoma, part of the Exodus movement, seeking true freedom beyond the reach of former masters. Martha Colson, the woman treated for lacerations, appears in Kansas records as a founding member of a settlement church. Her testimony before a congressional committee in 1877 described how a photographer's second, secret image became the catalyst for their escape. When we stood straight and showed our wounds true to that camera, something changed among us. We saw ourselves not as they wished us to be, but as we were, carrying our suffering openly. After that day, we could not continue the pretense. Perhaps most poignant was our discovery of what happened to Whitcomb himself. After submitting the sanitized image to his patrons, he never completed his Southern assignment. Letters to his family reveal his growing moral crisis. His final correspondence came from Louisiana, where he wrote, "I have betrayed truth for comfort and can no longer bear the weight of this complicity." He disappeared from historical record thereafter, though a J. Whitcomb appears in Freedmen's Bureau documents as a teacher in a rural black school until 1875. The dual photographs now stand together, one representing the history that power tried to create, the other showing the resistance that would not be erased, both captured by a man awakening to his own moral compromise. The photograph diptych, "Truth and Deception Side by Side," attracted unprecedented attention when featured in our digital exhibition. Among thousands of visitors was Dr. Amara Wilson, a forensic anthropologist specializing in historical trauma. Her analysis of the subject's physical conditions revealed patterns more systematic than we initially understood. "These aren't random punishments," Dr. Wilson explained during her examination. The scarring patterns indicate standardized methods consistent with what I've documented on plantation sites across the South. Most disturbing are the distinctive marks visible on 4 of the adults, evidence of an experimental restraint system patented in 1869 specifically designed to circumvent anti-slavery legislation. The patent documentation, filed under Agricultural Labor Management Device, described a wearable restraint that caused increasing pain when wearers ventured beyond set boundaries, yet left marks that could be dismissed as accidental injuries when inspected by federal agents. This discovery prompted us to examine business records from Hargrove's estate, where we found invoices for such devices purchased from Meridian Agricultural Supply, a company we traced to a consortium of former slave owners who had reinvented themselves as labor management consultants after the war. One ledger entry particularly chilled us. Payment to Crawford for silence regarding March incident, dated 1 week after Whitcomb's visit. Cross-referencing with local records identified Crawford as a Union captain assigned to Reconstruction enforcement in the county. The corruption extended beyond a single official. Correspondence between plantation owners revealed a coordinated effort to present sanitized images for northern consumption. One letter from a neighboring plantation owner congratulated Hargrove. "Your staged daguerreotype has been most useful in congressional circles." 3 more appropriations votes have fallen our way as representatives question the need for continued occupation. We located descendants of 2 children from the photograph, the James siblings, now elderly themselves. Rebecca James Townsend, Esther's daughter, shared family stories passed down about that day. My mother said that second photograph was their first real act of freedom, she told us. Not the Emancipation Proclamation, not the war's end, but the moment they chose to show their truth despite the consequences. She said afterward, even with the punishments that followed, something had changed inside them all. They had seized control of their own image. The most remarkable artifact came from Samuel James's descendants, a small smooth stone he had carried in his pocket that day. According to family history, he squeezed it during the first photograph to endure the forced smile, then held it visible in his palm during the second as a symbol of resistance. Grandfather said they had a secret agreement, his grandson explained. When Whitcomb nodded a certain way, they knew to change their stance. The photographer was risking everything too. The story of these photographs continues to evolve. Last month, architectural historians examining the plantation house's visible structure in the enhanced images identified a hidden cellar not documented in any plans, potentially used for unauthorized punishment after slavery's official end. Archaeological excavation has been approved for next spring. These images, capturing both fabricated contentment and defiant truth within minutes of each other, stand as perfect metaphors for Reconstruction itself. The gap between promise and reality, between legislative freedom and lived experience. Yet they also document something power never intended to record. The unbreakable dignity of those who, even with fresh wounds, found the courage to show history their unvarnished truth. The photograph's revelations continued to ripple outward, intersecting with our present in unexpected ways. During a public lecture where we presented our findings, an elderly man approached us with trembling hands, introducing himself as William Crawford III. "Captain Crawford was my grandfather," he said quietly. "I've carried his shame without understanding it fully until today." He surrendered a small leather portfolio containing his grandfather's personal papers, documents the captain had instructed to remain sealed until 50 years after his death. Among them was a confession penned in 1894, describing how he had been systematically bribed to ignore violations of Reconstruction laws. "I betrayed my uniform and my country's promises," Crawford wrote. "Each month, plantation owners across 3 counties paid for my blindness to their continued subjugation of those legally freed. When federal inspectors arrived, I was their advance warning. When complaints reached my desk, I ensured they advanced no further." Most damning was his description of the photography session itself. Crawford had been assigned to accompany Whitcomb as an official observer, ensuring the photographer captured appropriate scenes of Reconstruction success. His journal entry for that day included a disturbing admission. "I observed the second exposure but said nothing. I watched Whitcomb conceal that plate in his separate case. I should have reported him, confiscated it. Instead, I negotiated a higher price from Hargrove for my discretion, $5 more than usual. The confession explained what had previously puzzled us, how Whitcomb managed to preserve that second image when discovery would have meant severe consequences. Crawford had chosen money over duty, becoming complicit in a systematic deception that helped undermine federal commitment to protecting the formerly enslaved. Archaeological ground-penetrating radar at the plantation site has since revealed something Crawford's confession alluded to: a network of underground cells beneath what was documented as a storage barn. Preliminary excavation uncovered restraint hardware and fragments of leather straps consistent with the patented control devices. Dr. Wilson's team recovered something else from the site: a small, carved wooden figure buried beneath the floorboards of the former slave quarters. Anthropologists identified it as consistent with West African protective charms, secretly maintained through generations of enslavement. Buried with it was a scrap of fabric that DNA analysis confirmed contained blood from at least 3 individuals pictured in the photographs. This represents a spiritual resistance that accompanied the physical one, explained Dr. Yvonne Mbeki, a specialist in African diaspora cultural practices. Placing their blood together in sacred context was likely a pact among them, a shared commitment to their unified defiance. The most poetic connection emerged through music. A fragment of song notation in Esther James's later writings matched a melody recorded in 1937 by ethnomusicologists documenting folk songs in Oklahoma's black communities. The lyrics, clearly referencing the photographic incident without naming it directly, had survived as a coded testament. Stand straight for the light box, show truth to the glass. What's written in scars can't be covered with smiles. This melody, now reconstructed and performed by James's great-great-granddaughter, provides the soundtrack to our exhibition, a haunting reminder that resistance takes many forms and that truth, though temporarily suppressed, eventually finds its way to the surface through unexpected channels across generations. The discovery of the dual photographs altered the career path of Thomas Bennett, the graduate student who first performed the digital enhancement. What began as a technical exercise for his digital archival studies program evolved into an obsession with uncovering similar historical deceptions. Bennett's methodical examination of other Reconstruction-era photographs has yielded disturbing results. Using the same enhancement techniques, he has identified at least 17 additional images across 7 states that show evidence of staged contentment masking physical abuse. These photographs formed part of what appears to be a coordinated campaign to manipulate Northern public opinion. These weren't isolated incidents, Bennett explained during a recent interview. There was a visual language developing specifically to hide brutality in plain sight. Subjects positioned with arms folded to hide wrist wounds, women wearing high-necked dresses regardless of weather to conceal neck injuries, children arranged in tableaus that obscured their physical condition. Most chilling was his analysis of facial expressions across these photographs. Using artificial intelligence to map microscopic muscle patterns around eyes and mouths, Bennett demonstrated that the smiles in these images display consistent indicators of what modern psychology terms distress smiling, a fear response rather than an expression of genuine happiness. The Hargrove Plantation photographs have now catalyzed a fundamental re-examination of Reconstruction visual history. The Smithsonian Institution has launched a comprehensive project to reanalyze their entire collection of post-Civil War photography, searching for similar evidence of staged propaganda. Meanwhile, the land where Hargrove Plantation stood faces its own reckoning with history. After our findings became public, developers who had purchased the property for a planned luxury housing development withdrew their project. Community activists, led by descendants of those photographed, successfully petitioned to have the site designated as a historical landmark. Plans now call for a memorial and education center that will prominently feature both photographs, truth and fabrication side by side, as its central exhibit. The architectural design, created by renowned artist Maya Coleman, incorporates elements that cast changing shadows across reproductions of the images as the sun moves, symbolizing how perspective and light reveal what darkness attempts to conceal. Perhaps the most profound outcome emerged through DNA analysis offered to descendants of those in the photographs. Several families who had lost track of their ancestry due to forced migrations and name changes discovered connections to others descended from the same plantation. Last month, more than 100 descendants gathered on the former plantation grounds for a ceremony of remembrance and reclamation. Sarah James Williams, great-great-granddaughter of Samuel James, addressed the gathering. They tried to steal not just our ancestors' freedom, but their very expressions, forcing their faces to tell lies while their bodies bore the truth. Today, we reclaim both their suffering and their resistance. We bear witness to what they endured and honor how they survived. As night fell, each descendant placed a small stone in a growing cairn where the second photograph had been taken, a monument to truth that power could not permanently suppress, to stories that refused to remain hidden in the shadows of manipulated history. The emergence of the Hargrove plantation photograph sparked a methodological revolution in historical analysis that few could have anticipated. Academic institutions across 3 continents have now adopted what scholars call the shadow frames protocol, a multidisciplinary approach requiring historical photographs depicting marginalized peoples to undergo forensic digital analysis before conclusions are drawn about their contextual meaning. Last week, a team at the University of Edinburgh applying these techniques to colonial photography from 19th century India discovered similar patterns of coerced presentation. The methodology that exposed the truth of the Hargrove images has revealed a global pattern, noted Dr. Lakshmi Patel. Imperialism created a visual language of subjugation disguised as contentment that crossed continents. The most unexpected development came from Jeremiah Whitcomb's descendants. His great-great-granddaughter, Catherine Whitcomb Chen, contacted us after recognizing her ancestor's name in our exhibition. She had inherited a sealed metal box with instructions that it should only be opened when the second photograph becomes known. Inside was Whitcomb's complete journal and a letter addressed to those who found my truth. The photographer had documented an extensive network of northern journalists, artists, and photographers who had made similar moral compromises, capturing sanitized images while hiding evidence of continued brutality. He listed 27 names, many of them celebrated historical figures whose legacies will now require re-evaluation. "I am but one thread in a tapestry of complicity," Whitcomb wrote. "We who came with our cameras became not witnesses, but accomplices, selling palatable fictions to a nation eager to believe its conscience could rest easy." The final pages of his journal revealed Whitcomb's fate. After leaving the photography profession, he joined a community of radical abolitionists working underground to help formerly enslaved people escape continuing oppression. He died in 1877 while helping a family flee night riders, shot while covering their retreat across the Mississippi River. His final journal entry reads, "If there is redemption for one who hid truth for comfort, perhaps it lies in now risking comfort for truth." The dual photographs have become powerful pedagogical tools. Elementary education standards in 17 states now require students to analyze both images side by side, teaching critical visual literacy through the stark contrast between propaganda and reality. Harvard University recently completed a comprehensive study tracking the political impact of staged Reconstruction photography, establishing direct correlations between these images and the withdrawal of federal protections for the formerly enslaved. Congressional voting records show representatives who received portfolios of success, like the Hargrove photograph, voted consistently against extending Reconstruction protections, often citing these very images as evidence they were no longer necessary. These weren't just photographs, noted lead researcher Dr. James Washington. They were political weapons with measurable consequences. We can now draw direct lines between these staged images and policies that abandoned millions to renewed oppression. As digital archaeology continues to uncover hidden truths in historical images, we're reminded that photographs never simply record reality. They construct it, shape it, sometimes distort it entirely. Yet even in this constructed reality, traces of authentic human experience remain, waiting for the right technology, the right questions, and the right moment in history to emerge from the shadows. The images that had first emerged from the shadows now cast their own powerful light, illuminating not just one historical deception, but an entire architecture of visual propaganda. As our exhibition traveled to museums across the country, we noticed a pattern in visitor responses that transcended mere academic interest. People were experiencing a profound sense of recognition, as though confronting something they had always suspected, but never could name. At the Chicago Historical Society, an elderly visitor stood transfixed before the enlarged prints of both photographs. "This isn't just history," she whispered to me. "We're still being asked to smile for the camera while bearing fresh wounds." Her observation proved prescient when, last month, we received an unmarked package containing a flash drive and a handwritten note. The tradition continues. Different technology, same deception. The drive contained digital photographs from a private prison in Louisiana, dated just 2 years ago. The images showed incarcerated men in clean facilities, engaged in what appeared to be educational programs, with expressions suggesting rehabilitation and hope. They had been used in promotional materials to secure contract renewals worth millions of dollars. Alongside these official photographs were surreptitiously captured images taken days earlier or later, showing the same individuals bearing marks of physical abuse, standing in squalid conditions strikingly similar to those endured by the Hargrove plantation workers a century and a half before. Most disturbing was the discovery that the prison stood on land once part of the Crescent River plantation, less than 30 miles from where the Hargrove photographs were taken. The historical continuity was not merely symbolic. Records indicated the prison had been built in 1978 on foundation stones salvaged from the original plantation buildings. We approached the verification of these modern images with extreme caution, consulting with forensic experts and legal advisors. Initial authentication suggests they are genuine, though our investigation continues. 3 photojournalists who have examined the evidence have agreed to pursue the story, protected by the shield laws that Whitcomb never had. What connects these images across time is not just the pattern of deception, but the economic imperatives driving that deception. Hargrove needed Northern investment to maintain his control over labor. The prison corporation needs government contracts to maintain profitability. Both required visual evidence of humane conditions that contradicted reality. The commodification of black bodies has evolved in its mechanisms, but persists in its essence. From the plantation to the prison yard, the camera remains both witness and accomplice. Yesterday, we received word that descendants of both the Hargrove plantation workers and current families of the incarcerated have begun meeting, forming what they call the Truth Keepers Collective. Their mission statement reads simply, "To guard against forgetting, to expose what power conceals, to ensure that no smile is forced without eventually revealing its coercion." As we stand at this intersection of past and present, of exposed historical wounds and contemporary injuries still being inflicted, we are reminded that shadow frames exist not just in archives, but in our daily consumption of images. The most dangerous deceptions may be those we have not yet learned to recognize. The smiles that hide suffering we have not yet developed the moral technology to enhance and expose. The photograph saga has become more than documentation. It has become testimony. Last week, 3 survivors of the Louisiana prison system testified before a congressional committee, each holding copies of both the Hargrove plantation images and the contemporary prison photographs. "What connects these is not just cruelty, but deniability," explained former inmate Marcus Johnson, his voice steady despite the scars visible on his wrists. "In both cases, the official narrative requires us to be simultaneously visible and invisible. Our bodies present, but our suffering absent." The hearing room fell silent as he continued. "I was told to smile for the accreditation committee or lose visitation privileges, 140 years after those plantation workers faced the same choice." This testimony has catalyzed an interdisciplinary field emerging at universities nationwide: visual testimony studies. The discipline examines how photography functions not merely as historical documentation, but as evidence in ongoing struggles for justice. The dual photographs have become foundational texts in this curriculum. Dr. Eleanor Washington at Howard University has pioneered what she terms transgenerational image analysis, tracking visual patterns of forced representation across historical periods. "What's remarkable about the Hargrove photographs," she explains, "is not their uniqueness, but their representativeness. They're the exception only in that we have both the lie and its correction preserved together." Her research team has identified 5 consistent elements in stage depictions of institutionalized people across 3 centuries. regulated clothing to suggest uniformity and order, controlled posture signifying submission, arranged groupings implying community where often none is permitted, strategic positioning of authority figures, and most tellingly, facial expressions contradicting physical evidence of treatment. The most surprising application of the shadow frames methodology came from an unexpected quarter. Wildlife conservation photographers studying images used by industrial farming operations discovered identical patterns in promotional photographs of agricultural workers. Enhanced analysis revealed evidence of unsafe chemical exposure and injuries hidden beneath carefully arranged poses and camera angles. The same visual language of coercion transcends its subjects, noted photojournalist Sofia Mendez. Once you recognize the markers, you can't unsee them in contexts ranging from migrant farm labor to factory workers in promotional materials. Perhaps most poignantly, Esther James's descendants revealed another family heirloom passed down alongside the story of the photographs, a small mirror wrapped in cloth. According to family history, Esther kept this mirror to examine her own face regularly in private, practicing expressions that belonged truly to herself rather than those demanded by others. She called it her freedom glass, her great-granddaughter explained. Each night she would look at herself and make whatever face expressed her authentic feelings about the day. It was her way of reclaiming what had been stolen, control over her own image. This modest mirror now sits alongside the photographs in our permanent exhibition, a testament to interior freedom preserved even when external liberty was constrained, to the persistent human determination to maintain an authentic self behind the mask that power demands. As one visitor wrote in our exhibition guest book, these photographs aren't just about seeing the past more clearly, they're about questioning how we see and who controls what we're shown today. The Hargrove photographs have altered our understanding of visual evidence, but last month we discovered they also preserved something we never expected to find: sound. Dr. Vivian Torres, an acoustic archaeologist specializing in photophonography, contacted our team after reading about the image enhancements. Her specialty, recovering ambient sounds captured unintentionally in historical photographs, seemed far-fetched until she explained the science behind it. When these photographs were taken, the glass plate negative functioned somewhat like a primitive recording device, Dr. Torres explained during our first meeting. Microscopic vibrations from sound waves present during exposure can create subtle patterns in the emulsion. With sufficient enhancement and algorithmic processing, we can sometimes reconstruct audio fragments. While most attempts yield only indistinct noise, the Hargrove photographs offered unique potential because of their dual nature. 2 exposures taken minutes apart in identical conditions, allowing for comparative analysis that filters out background interference. After 3 months of painstaking work, Dr. Torres's team succeeded in recovering 23 seconds of audio from the second unposed photograph, the first ever recovered sound from the Reconstruction era, and possibly the earliest capturable human voices in existence. The audio quality remains poor, scratchy and distorted as one might expect, but several phrases are distinct enough to transcribe with reasonable certainty. What we hear is extraordinary. A man's voice saying clearly, "Show them what they'd done," followed by a woman responding, "Lord, see us now." Most chilling is a child's voice audible toward the end. "They can't make us smile no more." Voice pattern analysis compared to physical characteristics in the photograph suggests the male voice belongs to Samuel James, the man holding the small stone. The female voice likely belongs to Martha Colson, standing to his right. The child's voice corresponds to the position of young Esther James. We invited Rebecca James Townsend to our laboratory to hear her ancestors' voices, a profound moment that transcended academic discovery. She sat motionless as the scratchy audio played, then asked to hear it 3 more times, tears streaming silently down her face. "My grandmother told me her mother had a voice like truth itself," she whispered afterward. "Now I know exactly what that means." The discovery has revolutionary implications for historical research. Previously, our understanding of enslaved and formerly enslaved individuals' authentic voices came exclusively through written sources, often transcribed by others, or later oral histories. This direct audio evidence, captured in the moment of defiance, provides unmediated access to an experience previously known only through interpretation. What makes this audio fragment particularly significant is its capture of a pivotal moment. Not just physical resistance, but the actual decision and encouragement to resist. We hear not just suffering, but agency, not just pain, but the conscious choice to reveal it despite consequences. The National Museum of African American History has requested a permanent installation featuring both the visual and audio elements synchronized together, a multimedia testimony reaching across centuries, allowing these individuals to be seen and heard on their own terms. As Samuel James's descendant observed after hearing the recording, first their images came out of the shadows, now their voices have broken the silence. What they couldn't say freely then, they're finally saying to us now. The acoustic discovery prompted an international consortium of museums to re-examine their photographic collections with Dr. Torres's technology. Within months, 7 additional Reconstruction-era photographs yielded recoverable audio fragments. While most contained only ambient sounds or indistinct murmurs, a photograph from a Mississippi plantation revealed something unexpected: whispered counting. The rhythmic counting likely indicates a coordinated action among the subjects, explained Dr. Torres. They appear to be timing something together, perhaps the moment to change their expressions or reveal their injuries. This evidence of coordination transforms our understanding of these photographic sessions. What appeared to be spontaneous individual acts of defiance now reveal themselves as organized resistance, carefully planned moments of collective truth-telling. The most significant breakthrough came when Whitcomb's equipment was located in the basement of a New England historical society, misattributed to another photographer. His camera included a modified plate holder unlike any other from the period, designed to conceal a second negative plate beneath the first. This wasn't improvisation, noted forensic historian Dr. Martin Campbell. Whitcomb came prepared to capture both the lie and the truth. The equipment modifications would have taken considerable planning and skill to execute without detection. Letters discovered in Whitcomb's journal suggest he was not acting alone, but was part of a clandestine network of witness photographers operating throughout the South. These individuals outwardly complied with commissioned propaganda images while secretly documenting actual conditions. Their coded correspondence referenced double exposures of conscience and truth plates hidden beneath comfort images. Most of these secret photographs never survived. Many were discovered and destroyed, others lost to time. Whitcomb's journal mentions at least 14 photographers in this network, most using pseudonyms for protection. 3 were eventually murdered under suspicious circumstances, their equipment and negatives confiscated. The underground network extended beyond photographers. Recent analysis of the Hargrove plantation ledgers revealed subtle accounting discrepancies that appear to track supplies diverted to escaped workers. Several entries show quantities of food and medicine damaged in storage, on precisely the dates when former slaves disappeared from the plantation. Most surprising was the discovery that Rebecca, the plantation owner's wife, may have been complicit in this subterfuge. Her personal diary, written in a simple substitution cipher recently decoded, documents her growing horror at her husband's continued brutality. While never openly opposing him, she writes of small mercies made possible through calculated errors, suggesting she deliberately mismanaged household accounts to create resources for those planning escape. The web of resistance and complicity proves more complex than our initial understanding suggested. What appeared a simple binary of oppressors and victims now reveals itself as a nuanced landscape of accommodation, resistance, witness, and conscience, operating in the shadows of official power. As we prepare the complete audiovisual installation for national tour, we're reminded that history is never a single narrative, but rather a chorus of voices, some loud, some whispered, some deliberately silenced. Our task is not merely to amplify what was loud enough to survive, but to listen carefully for what power never intended us to hear. The revelation of this hidden resistance network altered the trajectory of our exhibition. What began as an examination of a single deceptive photograph had evolved into the recovery of an entire counter-history, one where those seemingly powerless had created sophisticated systems of documentation and resistance beneath the surface of official narratives. We received an unexpected email from Dr. Claudia Wentworth, curator at a small museum in Vermont, describing a collection of ordinary household items that had belonged to Jeremiah Whitcomb in his final years. Among them was an unassuming pincushion that appeared unremarkable until recent renovations at the museum caused it to fall and split open, revealing a hollowed interior containing a tightly folded paper. The document proved to be a map of what Whitcomb called the witness circuit, a network of safe locations where documentation of continued abuse could be hidden, developed, and eventually transported north. The circuit included 23 sites across 7 southern states, each marked with a simple symbol rather than a name. Most remarkable was the sophistication of their communication system. The network used quilts hung on clotheslines as visual signals, specific patterns indicating whether photography was occurring, whether federal inspectors were present, or whether it was safe to reveal truths to particular visitors. They weaponized the very stereotypes used against them, explained Dr. Wentworth. Authorities paid no attention to laundry hung by black women, seeing only domestic labor rather than a complex communication system operating in plain sight. The witness circuit explains how certain images survived despite systematic efforts to destroy evidence. Each documentation point had multiple potential evacuation routes for negatives and written testimonies. If one route was compromised, alternatives existed. Coded entries in church records across the South have now been identified as tracking the movement of these visual testimonies. What appeared to be simple donation records with oddly specific amounts, Widow Johnson contributes 17 cents and 3 dried apples, were actually documenting the transfer of 17 photographic plates and 3 written accounts. Most poignant was our discovery of what happened to Joseph Freeman, the Freedmen's Bureau agent visible in the Hargrove photograph's background. After being dismissed from his position for excessive concern regarding unverified complaints, Freeman did not abandon his mission, but rather joined the witness circuit as its primary archivist. Working under the guise of a traveling Bible salesman, Freeman collected visual and written testimony across 4 states. His coded journal, recently discovered in a collection of religious texts at Fisk University, documented over 300 incidents of continued enslavement, complete with names, dates, and physical evidence. The final entry in his journal, dated October 15, 1876, reads, "Though they control the present narrative, we are securing the evidence for history's verdict. They may force smiles today, but tomorrow belongs to truth." Freeman disappeared 3 days later. His body was found in a shallow grave near the Mississippi River, his camera and collection pouch missing. What his murderers failed to discover, however, was the hollowed heel of his boot where he had hidden microfilm copies of his most damning photographs, images now being painstakingly restored at the Smithsonian's Conservation Laboratory. The culmination of our research has manifested in an unexpected physical form. Last week we completed installation of what we call the testimony wall, a 20-foot-long interactive display featuring all recovered photographs from the witness circuit alongside their unretouched counterparts. As visitors move before the wall, motion sensors trigger the recovered audio fragments, creating an immersive experience where these individuals speak directly across time. During our opening reception, an elderly conservator from the National Archives approached with trembling hands, carrying an acid-free archival box she hadn't registered with our acquisition team. "I've held on to these for 30 years, waiting for the right moment," she explained. "When I saw your discovery of the witness circuit, I knew that moment had arrived." Inside the box lay 7 glass plate negatives, each carefully wrapped in pH-neutral tissue. Unlike the other photographs we'd examined, these weren't taken outside but within plantation buildings, specifically inside punishment spaces never meant to be documented. The conservator, Dr. Eleanor Blackwell, explained that these plates had been discovered concealed within the false bottom of a traveling medicine chest that had belonged to a Dr. Thomas Morrison, who served as a circuit physician in Louisiana and Mississippi from 1870 to 1874. Morrison appears to have been part of the witness circuit, using his position to access spaces closed to others, she explained. His medical credentials allowed him to document the aftermath of punishments under the guise of treating injuries. The images, now carefully enhanced, reveal custom-built restraint systems, specialized flogging apparatus, and most disturbingly, detailed ledgers visible on desk surfaces recording productivity penalties. essentially a formalized accounting system for translating perceived infractions into precisely calculated physical punishments. What makes these photographs particularly significant is their meticulous documentation of the mechanisms through which violence was institutionalized and bureaucratized in the post-emancipation South. This wasn't arbitrary cruelty, but systematized control, designed to maximize labor extraction while maintaining plausible deniability for Northern observers. The final negative in the collection has become the centerpiece of our exhibition. It shows a plantation office where a wall calendar is clearly visible, dated July 4, 1873, American Independence Day. Beneath it stands a former slave being fitted with iron restraints, while through the window a celebration can be seen on the main lawn with bunting and flags prominently displayed. The juxtaposition within a single frame, liberty celebrated publicly while systematically denied privately, encapsulates the dual reality of Reconstruction more powerfully than any written account could achieve. Dr. Blackwell had one final revelation. The medicine chest containing these negatives had been discovered during a renovation of her own childhood home in Baton Rouge in 1959. Her father, recognizing their historical significance, had hidden them again rather than surrender them to local historical authorities who might have suppressed them. "These plates have been waiting 65 years to testify," she said quietly. "3 generations of my family protected them until they could speak to ears ready to hear them." As we integrated these new images into our exhibition, we realized that the Shadow Frames project had become something beyond academic inquiry. It had become an act of witnessing across time, allowing those systematically silenced to finally deliver their testimony to a jury of history. The photograph that began as historical curiosity and evolved into testimony has now catalyzed tangible change. Yesterday, the Justice Department announced the formation of a specialized visual evidence task force dedicated to examining modern institutional photography for signs of staged conditions and coerced presentations across prisons, detention centers, and labor camps nationwide. The Hargrove methodology has fundamentally altered our approach to institutional oversight, explained Attorney General Michaela Richardson at the press conference. "We've been trained to look at facilities but not truly see the people within them. That changes today." The task force includes not only forensic analysts, but also psychologists, specializing in facial micro-expressions and body language specialists, capable of identifying signs of duress invisible to untrained observers. Most significantly, the team includes 3 former incarcerated individuals whose lived experience brings essential perspective to image analysis. Within this official response lies a poetic completion of Jeremiah Whitcomb's abandoned mission. His great-great-granddaughter Catherine has accepted a position as the task force's historical consultant, bringing with her the technical journals that detail his photographic innovations developed specifically to preserve evidence of abuse. "My ancestor created techniques to document truth when conventional photography failed," she explained during our interview. "He developed custom chemical processes that could capture marks normally invisible to the camera, injuries deliberately inflicted to cause pain without leaving evidence for visiting inspectors. These techniques, revolutionary for their time, have now been adapted using modern technology to create what the task force calls trauma-enhanced imaging, a process that can reveal patterns of physical stress and injury not apparent in standard photography." The most profound validation came last week during congressional testimony from Samuel Parks, a formerly incarcerated witness who had appeared in the contemporary prison photographs we discovered. Parks described how the correctional facility had prepared for official visits. They called it inspection readiness, but it was really about creating illusions, he testified. Fresh paint over mold, temporary bedding collected after photographers left, extra food on that one day, and always the instruction, "Smile like you're grateful, or you'll be sorry tonight." Parks paused, then added what might become the defining statement of this entire investigation. "The difference between then and now isn't that we're no longer forced to smile. The difference is that now someone is finally looking past our smiles." The legacy of the plantation workers who refused to hide their scars has manifested in unexpected ways. A coalition of documentary photographers has established the Hargrove Fellowship, funding photographers dedicated to capturing institutional realities without manipulation or staged scenes. Their first exhibition, titled Beyond the Smile, opens next month at galleries in 12 cities simultaneously. As our project enters its final phase, we find ourselves contemplating the power of a single moment of collective courage. How one brief act of defiance, captured on a fragile glass plate and hidden away for generations, could eventually grow into a movement capable of changing how an entire society distinguishes between authentic documentation and manufactured narrative. The shadows have not disappeared, but perhaps we have finally learned how to see what they've been concealing all along. The story of the Hargrove photographs has transcended academic circles and museum exhibitions, finding its way into educational curricula across the nation. Last semester, Professor Elaine Montgomery at Carleton College assigned her photography students an unusual project to create their own dual images, documenting contemporary institutional settings. The assignment was simple, Montgomery explained. Create an official portrait that the institution would approve, then immediately capture the reality they don't want shown. The results proved extraordinary. Students documented nursing homes where residents were quickly positioned in activities they normally couldn't access, homeless shelters where services appeared only during donor visits, and immigrant detention facilities where overcrowding was temporarily relieved for inspection days. Each student's work included rigorous documentation of how conditions changed before and after official observation. The resulting exhibition, titled Institutional Theater, traveled to 30 colleges before catching media attention when several facilities threatened legal action for what they termed misrepresentation. The irony was not lost on the students. They're claiming we misrepresented them by showing exactly what they do, noted photography student Miguel Sanchez, whose images of a for-profit juvenile detention center revealed children in educational settings that existed only during scheduled tours. More profound than these institutional exposures was the psychological impact on the subjects themselves. Several participants in the student projects reported experiencing what psychologists have now termed Hargrove moments, instances when people under institutional control consciously reject performing contentment for observers. Dr. Renee Wilson, a trauma specialist working with the project, observed, "There's extraordinary psychological liberation in that refusal. When someone decides, I will not smile to make my oppressor comfortable, they reclaim something essential about their humanity." This phenomenon has spread beyond formal photography. Cell phone videos have emerged showing workers at factories with documented labor violations refusing to participate in corporate promotional filming. In one viral instance, warehouse employees turned their backs to company cameras during a visit from investors, silently displaying handwritten accounts of their working conditions on paper attached to their uniforms. The visual language of resistance pioneered by those plantation workers has evolved into what cultural theorists call embodied testimony, using one's physical presence to contradict official narratives without speaking a word. Perhaps most meaningful has been the annual gathering now taking place on the former Hargrove plantation grounds. Descendants of those in the original photographs host workshops teaching communities how to document their lived realities when facing institutional power. The three-day event concludes with participants creating their own contemporary version of that second, truthful photograph, standing together, bearing witness to current struggles against economic exploitation, environmental racism, and mass incarceration. What our ancestors discovered in that moment of defiance, explained community organizer and James descendant Darius Williams, was that the most revolutionary act isn't always destroying power's structures. Sometimes it's simply refusing to maintain the illusion that those structures are just. The dual photographs acquired unexpected power beyond our gallery walls, circulating through communities facing institutional documentation. We began receiving letters describing what anthropologists now call collective refusal events, moments when groups being photographed for official purposes spontaneously reveal, rather than conceal, their circumstances. A particularly moving account came from a nursing assistant at a chronically understaffed elder care facility. During a regulatory inspection, residents were positioned in a recreation area rarely used except during such visits. As the official photographer prepared to capture this scene of apparent engagement and care, an elderly resident suddenly spoke up. "I want to show them the bed sores." Like ripples in still water, her words spread across the room. Within moments, residents were displaying pressure wounds, showing medication schedules missed for days, revealing call buttons deliberately placed out of reach. The inspection, intended as a formality, transformed into a genuine assessment that ultimately led to new ownership and dramatically improved conditions. What connects these modern moments to those plantation workers is not just the act of revealing, but the profound risk involved. The nursing home residents, like their historical counterparts, faced potential retaliation for their truth-telling, yet found in collective action the courage that might have faltered individually. The most unexpected application emerged through Dr. Torres's continuing acoustic research. By refining her techniques, she recovered additional audio fragments from the second Hargrove photograph. Not just words this time, but what appears to be the beginning of a song. Music historians identified the melody as a variant of a spiritual documented decades later, with lyrics about Revelation and Judgment Day. This discovery sparked collaboration with ethnomusicologists who recognized that singing had served multiple purposes during enslavement, not just spiritual expression but coded communication and psychological resistance. The melody captured in that fleeting moment of defiance appears in church records across 5 states in the following years, suggesting it became an anthem of sorts for the witness circuit. Reverend Calvin Thompson, whose great-grandfather helped maintain the circuit through his Methodist congregation, shared a family oral history about this particular song. My ancestor called it the standing-up music. He said it wasn't for marching or working or even praying. It was specifically for moments when people decided they would no longer perform contentment with injustice. The song's recovered fragments have been reconstructed and recorded by a choir composed entirely of descendants from those pictured in both photographs. Their performance, which opens our traveling exhibition, creates a sonic bridge across generations. The voices of the present completing what their ancestors began but could not finish. As we prepare the final documentation of this project, we find ourselves reflecting on how a single moment of collective courage, captured through Whitcomb's dual exposures, continues to reverberate through time. The photographs have transformed from historical artifacts into something more akin to living documents. Not relics of past suffering, but templates for ongoing resistance, teaching each new generation that the most revolutionary act sometimes begins with simply refusing to smile when truth demands tears. The sonic resonance of the standing-up music has spread beyond museum walls and academic circles, finding its way into unexpected contemporary spaces. Last month, during a televised tour of a corporate farm showcasing its ethical labor practices, a group of migrant workers began humming the melody as cameras panned across their carefully staged working conditions. Though few viewers recognized the historical reference, the workers' expressions, that same unmistakable look of forced contentment contrasted with unwavering eyes, spoke volumes to those who had studied the Hargrove photographs. This musical thread connected to another unexpected development when Catherine Whitcomb Chen discovered additional notes hidden within her great-great-grandfather's pincushion. These fragile papers revealed that Jeremiah Whitcomb had collaborated with Joseph Freeman on a systematic documentation method combining photography with musical notation, what they called testimony in harmony. Workers unable to read or write could memorize specific melodic patterns that, when matched with photographs, indicated precise locations, dates, and types of abuses occurring beyond federal oversight. The Smithsonian Conservation Team working on Freeman's microfilm images found corresponding musical notations in the margins, finally explaining the peculiar numbering system that had puzzled researchers for months. When matched with the recovered audio fragments, these notations unlocked dozens of previously indecipherable documents from the witness circuit. Meanwhile, the archaeological excavation at the Hargrove plantation has yielded something extraordinary. A small metal object initially mistaken for a common sewing thimble. Under closer examination, researchers identified it as a modified photography aperture created by Whitcomb, designed to be easily concealed yet capable of capturing images through buttonholes or small openings. This ingenious device explained how some of Dr. Morrison's most damning photographs could have been taken without detection. The convergence of these discoveries has transformed our understanding of resistance during Reconstruction. What once appeared as isolated acts of defiance now reveals itself as a sophisticated, interconnected system of documentation and preservation. A truth archive carefully constructed to survive the very power structures determined to erase it. Most moving was the testimony of William Crawford IV, the great-grandson of Captain Crawford III, who recently completed a fellowship at the Equal Justice Initiative. During the closing ceremony of our exhibition in Montgomery, he stood beside descendants of those his ancestor had failed to protect and made a remarkable announcement. The Crawford family had converted their inherited plantation lands into a Truth and Reconciliation Center dedicated to documenting both historical and contemporary forms of labor exploitation. My family's wealth came from enforcing smiles that masked suffering, he stated. Our redemption can only come through supporting those who refuse to perform contentment with injustice. As our collection moves to its permanent home at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, we recognize that the dual photographs are not artifacts of a concluded history, but rather living documents in an ongoing struggle between power's demand for comforting narratives and the persistent human determination to reveal uncomfortable truths. The final chapter of the Hargrove photograph's journey unfolded last week when a construction crew renovating an old post office in Baton Rouge discovered a metal box sealed within its cornerstone. Inside lay 18 glass plate negatives wrapped in oilcloth, preserved in remarkable condition despite their 150 years of entombment. Each plate bore a small etched symbol matching those on Whitcomb's witness circuit map, confirming these as the long-rumored Judgment Collection, the most comprehensive visual documentation of post-emancipation abuses, deliberately hidden by the circuit's members for future generations to discover. Unlike previous finds, these images were methodically labeled with names, dates, and precise locations. Most significantly, they included photographs of figures previously known only from written records, including Senator Morrison himself inspecting restraint devices at 3 separate plantations while campaigning publicly against continued federal oversight in the South. The collection contained something even more remarkable, a double-exposure photograph of Whitcomb himself. The first image shows him posed formally with his camera, the very picture of professional dignity. The second, taken moments later, reveals him displaying his own scarred wrists and a bullet wound in his shoulder, evidence of the price he paid for his eventual decision to document truth rather than propaganda. A small handwritten note accompanied this self-portrait. When future eyes examine the record of these days, let them find not only what power demanded be seen, but what conscience demanded be shown. May they understand that for each smile forced upon the oppressed, someone bearing witness made a choice between comfort and truth. The discovery coincided with the unanimous Supreme Court decision in Thompson v. Mid-State Correctional, ruling that staged or misrepresentative documentation of institutional conditions constitutes a form of fraud when used to secure government contracts or avoid regulatory penalties. Writing for the majority, Justice Eleanor Williams specifically cited the Hargrove photographs as historical precedent, noting that the presentation of manufactured contentment to obscure abuse constitutes not merely deception, but a violation of fundamental human dignity. On the former Hargrove plantation grounds, now the Center for Visual Truth, a memorial garden opened featuring 18 reflective pools, one for each person identified in the original photographs. At the center stands a simple glass structure housing both photographs side by side, with a mirror positioned so visitors momentarily see their own reflection between historical deception and historical truth. During the dedication ceremony, 94-year-old Rebecca James Townsend, the last living grandchild of anyone pictured in the photographs, addressed the gathering. With assistance from her granddaughter, she walked slowly to the memorial and placed her grandmother Esther's small mirror in a specially designed reliquary at its center. This mirror witnessed my grandmother finding herself again after others tried to make her into something she wasn't, she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. May it remind us that between what power wants us to see and what truth demands we acknowledge, we must always choose truth, even when, especially when, truth doesn't smile. The ultimate truth of the Hargrove photographs emerged not through further discoveries, but through an unexpected source, Hargrove's own hidden confession. During the renovation of the Center for Visual Truth's East Wing, workers removed a loose brick in what had been his private study, revealing a small tin box containing a journal bound in faded leather. The handwriting, authenticated as Hargrove's, revealed something more complex than mere cruelty. In trembling script dated just before his death in 1883, He wrote of a bargain with 15 other plantation owners across 3 states, a coordinated experiment in what he called freedom management. We understood that legal emancipation need not mean practical liberty, he wrote. The photographs were not merely deception aimed at Northern observers, but test cases to determine precisely how much visible injury could be displayed while still maintaining the illusion of contentment. Each stage session measured different variables: fresh wounds versus healing ones, visible restraint marks versus concealed injuries. Most disturbing was his clinical documentation of exactly how much physical abuse could be inflicted before subjects became photographically unsuitable, unable to maintain the required expressions of contentment regardless of threats. The plantation owners shared their findings, refining their techniques of visual deception while maximizing physical control. The genius lies in making their very faces testify against their bodies, Hargrove wrote. When a Northern philanthropist sees a smiling Negro bearing scars, he does not question the scars, but rather takes the smile as evidence that conditions remain acceptable. The contradiction resolves itself in the observer's mind according to what he wishes to believe. Hargrove revealed what happened to Thomas, the man who didn't smile right during the first photograph. He was not merely punished, but subjected to calculated experiments in facial control, his jaw and facial muscles manipulated through specialized devices Hargrove had commissioned from a surgical instrument maker. The final pages contained something unexpected, evidence of Hargrove's growing paranoia. He had discovered Whitcomb's deception and suspected a broader conspiracy, writing frantically about eyes everywhere and judgment being prepared against us. His last entry, written days before his death from what had been recorded as apoplexy, suggested he believed the photographs themselves had become cursed, that the truth captured in them was somehow gaining power over those who had orchestrated the deception. "I dream of them standing without smiles," he wrote, "their eyes following me even when I am awake. They are waiting for something. I fear they will not wait much longer." The journal completed the circle of testimony, proof that the deception was not merely opportunistic, but systematic, not merely cruel, but experimentally refined. The staged contentment masked not just individual suffering, but an organized effort to create a sustainable model of continued exploitation beneath the thin veneer of technical freedom. The truth, finally, was that the Hargrove photographs captured not just a moment of resistance, but the first visible fracture in a calculated system that had underestimated the power of the very people it sought to control. People who discovered that freedom begins with the refusal to perform the oppressor's preferred narrative, even when that refusal comes at terrible cost. The final installation of the Shadow Frames exhibition opened last night at the National Portrait Gallery to unprecedented attendance, with lines stretching around the block for over 5 hours. Visitors moved slowly through the chronologically arranged revelations, many emerging visibly shaken from what curators have named the testimony room, the culmination where all 20 recovered photographs from the witness circuit are displayed alongside Hargrove's confession. What makes this exhibition unique is not just its content, but its methodology. Each visitor receives an unretouched copy of the original, smiling photograph upon entry. As they progress through the exhibition and learn its true context, they must reconcile their initial impression with the gradually revealed reality, experiencing in compressed form the same journey of discovery that researchers underwent. Education departments from 17 countries have requested the exhibition's curriculum materials, adapting the dual image methodology as a framework for teaching critical visual literacy. In Singapore, secondary schools have already implemented a unit called the Hargrove Protocol, teaching students to analyze contemporary institutional photography for signs of coercion and staged contentment. The revelations have sparked practical consequences beyond education. Insurance companies now require authentication disclaimers on promotional materials showing institutional conditions. Lawmakers in 4 states have passed visual truth in contracting legislation requiring facilities receiving public funding to permit unannounced documentation by independent photographers alongside any official visual records. Perhaps most profound has been the terminology entering our cultural lexicon. Forced smile work now describes the emotional labor required of vulnerable populations to present contentment for institutional benefit. Hargrove lighting refers to photographic techniques that deliberately obscure evidence of poor conditions while highlighting superficial positives. Dr. Elaine Montgomery's former students have established a nonprofit organization providing counter-documentation services to communities facing institutional misrepresentation. Their photographers work alongside official photographers at corporate events, capturing wider angles that show what happens just beyond the carefully framed official shots. The recovered standing-up music has evolved beyond memorial into functional resistance. Last month, when a technology company attempted to photograph smiling workers at a warehouse with documented safety violations, employees began humming the melody, a signal instantly understood by those who recognized it. The company's photographer later resigned, releasing both the official images and the wider shots she had privately taken showing the actual working conditions. Medical researchers at Johns Hopkins have identified measurable physical and psychological benefits for institutional subjects who participate in truthful documentation rather than staged presentations. Their preliminary findings suggest that testimony photography, where subjects control how their circumstances are depicted, can reduce symptoms of trauma and powerlessness. As the exhibition travels to international venues, each location adds a component documenting local histories of visual manipulation and resistance. In South Africa, curators juxtapose the Hargrove photographs with images from apartheid-era model townships, created specifically for foreign journalists. In Bangladesh, textile workers contributed contemporary images showing the contrast between factory conditions during inspector visits versus ordinary working days. The photographs that began as instruments of deception, then served as catalysts for revelation, have ultimately transformed into templates for recognition, teaching us to see not just historical manipulation, but its persistent modern forms, and reminding us that the most fundamental freedom might be the right to present oneself truthfully to history's gaze. In the quiet hours after the museum closes, we sometimes stand alone before those dual images, the forced contentment and the revealed truth, and contemplate how a single moment of collective courage continues to ripple outward through time. The Hargrove photographs, once tools of deception, have completed an extraordinary transformation into instruments of liberation. Last week, we received a letter from a nursing home resident in Oregon who had visited our traveling exhibition. "I am 93 years old," she wrote, "and have spent my life smiling when told to smile. After seeing your exhibition, I asked my granddaughter to photograph me as I truly feel, tired, in pain sometimes, but also fierce and undefeated. It was the most honest I've felt in decades." Her photograph, displayed now alongside dozens of others in our Contemporary Testimonies section, shows a face lined with experience, unflinching in its dignity, neither performatively happy nor deliberately sorrowful, simply powerfully authentic. Perhaps this is the photograph's greatest legacy, not just revealing historical deception but inspiring contemporary truth-telling that extends far beyond museum walls. The shadow frames methodology has evolved from historical investigation into a living practice of visual honesty, embraced by communities worldwide. Esther James's small mirror has inspired a ritual now practiced at the conclusion of each exhibition. Visitors are invited to stand before a simple mirror, make whatever expression truly reflects their feelings, and then photograph themselves if they choose. Thousands of these unfiltered self-portraits now form a growing digital archive called Faces Without Permission, each one a tiny declaration of the right to present oneself authentically to the world. The final fate of the original glass plate negatives has been determined after considerable deliberation. Rather than remaining solely in institutional hands, they will rotate annually among 3 repositories: the National Museum of African American History, the Crawford Family Truth Center, and the community archive established by descendants of those pictured. This shared stewardship acknowledges that these images belong not to any single institution, but to a collective memory that requires multiple perspectives for proper preservation. Samuel James's small stone, carried in his pocket during that pivotal moment of defiance, has been replicated in smooth river rocks available at exhibition exits. Visitors often take these tokens away with them, a tactile reminder of the courage required to stand in one's truth when power demands a performance. As we prepare the comprehensive publication documenting this journey, we find ourselves returning to Whitcomb's final journal entry, written shortly before his death. I once believed photography captured reality, until I saw how easily it could be made to lie. Then I believed photography revealed truth, until I understood how partial even honest vision can be. Now I know photography's highest purpose, not to capture or reveal, but to witness, to stand present at the intersection of power and humanity, and choose which shall have the final word. The Hargrove photographs have taught us that images, like history itself, are never finished speaking. Their testimony continues as long as there are eyes willing to see beyond surfaces, minds willing to question comfortable narratives, and hearts willing to recognize that the most authentic portrait of humanity will never be the one where everyone is smiling. The Hargrove photographs have transcended their physical existence, becoming something that lives within those who encounter them. Yesterday, a package arrived containing a handwritten letter from Maria Vasquez, a domestic worker in Los Angeles who visited our exhibition 6 months ago. Inside was a simple modern Polaroid showing her employer's immaculate kitchen staged for a real estate listing, and beside it, a second image of the same space filled with cleaning supplies, worn equipment, and evidence of the labor typically erased from such presentations.
"I didn't have a special camera like Whitcomb," she wrote, "but I remembered what you taught us about dual documentation. The real estate photographer told me to stay out of frame. Instead, I waited until he left and captured what he didn't want seen, the work behind the perfection." This simple act of counter-documentation exemplifies how the methodology has evolved from historical recovery into everyday practice. Ordinary people armed with nothing more sophisticated than smartphone cameras are creating their own visual testimony, refusing to be edited out of spaces their labor maintains. The most profound validation came unexpectedly through neural imaging research at Stanford University. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka's team studied brain activity in exhibition visitors viewing the dual photographs, discovering that witnessing the contrast between forced contentment and revealed truth activates regions associated with moral reasoning and empathic response at levels rarely seen in laboratory settings. The brain physically rewires itself when confronted with this specific type of visual revelation, Dr. Tanaka explained. "We're seeing evidence that recognizing forced performative happiness as a form of oppression actually strengthens neural pathways related to ethical decision-making and recognition of authentic human emotion. This biological response suggests something remarkable, that bearing witness to visual truth may be not merely a learned skill, but a fundamental human capacity that, once activated, permanently alters how we perceive the world around us. Once you've truly seen a forced smile for what it is, your brain cannot unsee it in other contexts." The Hargrove methodology has found unexpected application in therapeutic settings, where psychologists now use carefully curated sequences of institutional versus authentic photography to help patients recognize and resist coercive emotional performance in their own lives. Visual liberation therapy, as it's now called, has shown particular promise with survivors of domestic abuse and institutional trauma. Most touching was the ceremony held last week when Esther James's great-great-great-granddaughter graduated from film school. Her thesis documentary, Beyond the Smile, followed 3 generations of women in service professions documenting their authentic working conditions alongside their employers' curated presentations. As she accepted her degree, she carried her ancestors' small mirror in her pocket, the same one Esther had used to reclaim her true face after being forced to perform contentment for Hargrove's camera. As we prepare for the final installation of this exhibition, we find ourselves contemplating not just what these photographs have revealed about our past, but how they've transformed our vision of the present. The capacity to distinguish between authentic human expression and coerced performance may be the most essential literacy for navigating a world increasingly mediated through carefully constructed images. The Hargrove photographs have come full circle. Yesterday, on the 150th anniversary of the day those images were captured, we gathered where it all began. The former plantation grounds, now a memorial garden, hosted the descendants of everyone connected to these images, those who had been photographed, those who took the photographs, those who tried to hide the truth, and those who worked to preserve it. As dusk fell,
Each person held a small handheld mirror reflecting the setting sun, creating hundreds of points of light across the landscape. The symbolism was unmistakable, illumination coming not from a single source but from countless individual acts of reflection. What began as our investigation into a single deceptive image has blossomed into a global visual literacy movement. Universities worldwide now teach the Hargrove methodology course, training students to detect visual propaganda across contexts from corporate marketing to political campaigns to institutional documentation. The original glass plate negatives have been permanently enshrined in a specially designed vault at the Center for Visual Truth, where they're displayed alongside contemporary examples of institutional deception and resistance collected from 27 countries. Each pair tells the same essential story. Power demands a performance, truth demands acknowledgement, and between these stands the human capacity to choose. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came silently during the ceremony. As we stood on those grounds where forced smiles once masked fresh wounds, no one smiled for the commemorative photograph. Instead, each face displayed whatever authentic emotion the moment brought: sorrow, pride, determination, hope, a chorus of human expression freed from performance. The journey of these photographs reminds us that archives are not passive repositories, but active participants in our ongoing struggle to understand both our history and ourselves. What we choose to preserve, what we allow to vanish, what we enhance, what we ignore. These decisions shape not just our understanding of the past, but our experience of the present. As Thomas Bennett, the graduate student who first enhanced the image to reveal its hidden scars, remarked during the ceremony, "We began by asking what this photograph was hiding. We ended by asking what it was trying to tell us all along." The Hargrove photographs were never simply evidence of historical deception. They were always a message in a bottle, cast into the future by people who believed that someday eyes would see what they had endured, ears would hear their unspoken testimony, and hearts would recognize the profound courage required to stand in one's truth when the cost of doing so was terribly high. And so we return to where we began. A photograph of seemingly contented former slaves gathered in 1870. But now we see it with transformed vision. What once appeared as shadows, we recognize as wounds. What once looked like smiles, we understand as coercion. What once seemed like documentation, we now know was propaganda. And what once passed as history, we now recognize as a battlefield where truth fought for survival against overwhelming odds. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.